What's up everybody, my name is Hubert, and in this video I'll be making a showcase of my Unreal Engine plugin Enhanced Camera Shake Patterns, ECSP for short. I'll cover its features, how to use it, we'll show some examples and how it works in action, so this will be basically a quick start guide so you can get an overview of what it is and whether it's for you. The marketplace link to the plugin will be in the description, so I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't already. And with that covered, before I jump into Unreal, I'll briefly explain what the ECSP is and what it does. So, ECSP is a UI plugin that extends the functionality of camera shape patterns in Unreal Engine by adding new features and by enhancing the existing ones. So basically this plugin is for you if you want to take your camera shakes to a next level. It's very useful if you have a game that relies heavily on camera shakes, for example like those VHS or bodycam stylized games. Alright, so in Unreal Engine, when you get the plugin, first thing you want to do is make sure you have it enabled. So go into your plugins, type the Enhanced Camera Shape Patterns, and make sure you have it ticked. So if it wasn't, make sure you also restart the engine. And the second thing you want to do is go here into your settings in the content browser and make sure you have the Show Engine Content and Show Plugin Content is enabled. So if you go down here in the content browser, you can go to plugins, and if you scroll down you can see Enhanced Camera Shape Patterns content. So here you got two folders. One is with example camera shakes and the curves that those camera shakes use, and the second folder is with example player character. So you pretty much have an example player character here that you can play around with. It has some code that is responsible for those camera shakes. You can actually put it as your default pawn class in a game mode override, and if you place it here in the world settings and if you play the game, you can actually see that right now you can walk, you can sprint, and you can see appropriate camera shakes for those states. For now I'll focus on the core features of the ECSP, so for that let's create a new camera shake base. This one I'm gonna call it example CS. Open it up, close it up, open it up again, so we have this nice view. And if you install everything correctly, you should see ECSP curve, parent noise, and wave oscillator in this root shake pattern drop down. So these are the three camera shape patterns that ECSP provides, and I'm gonna go through most of the features so you can get an overview what it is, So I'm gonna start with wave oscillator. The main category that we want to focus on is the properties section. Actually, all of these three camera shakes by ECSP have the same category, and most of the properties are actually the same, especially the wave oscillator and parent noise. So I'm not gonna go through them twice. The duration, blending time, blend-out time are the settings that you previously had in a regular camera shake. So if, for example, go back to the wave oscillator, as you can see, these are in the timing section, so they work the same way as in those regular ones. So duration, if you set it to 0, it's gonna be infinite, and the blending time, blend-out time, it's self-explanatory. It just defines how long the blend-in and blend-out time will be. So back to the wave oscillator from ECSP. If you go to the properties section, you can now decide whether you want to blend amplitude or not, and whether you want to blend the frequency or not. This is something that the regular wave oscillator doesn't have. So by default, if you have the wave oscillator from Unreal Engine, it's not gonna blend the frequency at all. It's just gonna blend the amplitude. So you can actually turn it on, turn it off. And both of these, amplitude and frequency, have their own easing function. So you can interpolate this, whether you want to use ease in, ease out, maybe exponential, it's up to you. You can play around with this. So right now on the screen you can see a comparison between regular blending versus the blending from the ECSP with the interpolation and with the frequency blending. It doesn't look like much, but if you actually look closely, there's a significant difference. The next feature of the ECSP is something called phase shifting. So what phase shifting is, it basically allows you to offset any oscillator by a specific amount. So for example, if you go to rotation and for example yaw, inside the initial offset tab, we can now set it to an exact value. Previously it was only random or 0. So right now with this exact value, we can for example set it to 30 or something. And we will basically offset the yaw oscillator with a 30-degree shift. So right now on the screen you can see how the phase shifting can affect the camera shake. Just by adding a 30-degree shift we can see a quite different pattern that it makes. Another feature of the ECSP is parameter mapping. So the idea behind parameter mapping is that instead of using an amplitude and frequency for an oscillator, we instead provide the camera shake a mapped float parameter for each location, rotation and FOV, and based on that value the specific oscillator can drive the amplitude and frequency values dynamically on runtime with a curve. So if we enable this, you can set it externally or you can also edit it here. So the mapped parameter drives the horizontal axis of the curve, while amplitude and frequency values of the oscillator are set to the vertical axis of the curve. So X curve controls the amplitude, Y curve controls the frequency. To better demonstrate this, let's take a look on how it's done in the example player character. The player's current movement speed is being used as the mapped parameter, and we can divide it into 3 main states: idle, when player is done moving; walking, when we reach the speed of 300; and sprinting, when we reach 600. So, the X curve, the red one, defines how the amplitude value of the oscillator will react to the player's speed, and the Y curve, the green one, defines how the frequency value will react to the player's speed. So when the player is done moving, both amplitude and frequency are going to be set to 0. When the player starts moving, the amplitude and frequency values will increase to these values. And finally, when the player reaches its highest possible speed by sprinting, the amplitude and frequency are going to be set to these values accordingly. Additionally, to make things even more smooth, you can interpolate the mapped values of the amplitude and frequency. When you enable this, you can also adjust the upward speed of the interpolation as well as the downward speed. So you can define how quick should the interpolation be if the mapped parameter value goes up, and how quickly it should be when the mapped parameter value goes down. Now, to set the values of the mapped parameters, you want to call the setShakeMappedParameters values function from the ECSP interface, directly on the root shake pattern of the camera shake object. And then you want to provide the values for the mapped parameters. You can set them separately for location, rotation and FOV, but in this case, since we are in the example player character blueprint, we provide player's current movement speed to each one. This interface function can be called anytime on the runtime. In this case, it's being called every frame, since the movement speed of the player can change at any given time. Okay, so with the theory explained, let's actually see how it works in a game scenario. So what I have here is the example player character blueprint again, set as my default pawn class. And as you can see, if I start walking, we have a camera shake. And when I stop walking, it just goes to 0. And at first it looks like a regular state-based camera shake that just starts when we start walking and stops when we stop walking. But what actually happens in the background is we start a single camera shake on the begin play, and we keep updating the values of the mapped parameters every single frame. So when I start sprinting, you can see that it again changes its frequency and amplitude values, and when I go back to walking, it goes back to a semi-intensity. And what's really good about this is that often when you use state-based camera shakes, like for example you have 3 camera shakes for each movement state, like idle, walking and sprinting, you will run into problems where if you start spamming the W key or shift key, or mess around with the input, you can often get those camera shakes pretty much broken. And with this parameter mapping approach, it's just pretty much impossible to break it. So for example, if I run into a wall, even though I still hold my W key and you can see I'm sliding and trying to sprint, there's actually no camera shake, because it's directly linked to the player's velocity speed. The parameter mapping interpolation is also very useful here. I don't know if you noticed, but when we start walking or sprinting, the camera shake is very responsive and it adjusts its speed very quickly. But when I stop sprinting and stop completely, it takes it a while until it reaches 0. So that is thanks to the interpolation, and the downward speed of the interpolation is just lower than the upward speed. So we just pretty much have a camera shake that is very responsive and can adjust the speed very quickly if we start walking, but it slowly fades out when we stop. So yeah, that's the very nice thing about it. Alright, so we pretty much covered all the features of the wave oscillator as well as the present noise. So let's move on to the ECSP curve now. ECSP curve is different from the previous camera shape patterns because it's not oscillator based. It uses curves to directly control the location, rotation and FOV. So when I open up, for example, the location category, you can see that there are no XYZ subcategories, and instead there's one vector curve that is capable of animating the XYZ axis at once. So I loaded up an external curve to better demonstrate this. It's one of the example curves used for a jump camera shake. And as you can see, there's a blue curve that quickly goes down and slowly goes back to the place it started at. Since it's a Z curve, it will lower the player's camera down and up. By also adding a rotation curve and FOV curve to this, we can get a decent looking camera shake that imitates the camera movement when the player jumps. With the curved camera shape pattern, it's very convenient to make these type of camera shakes. The same can be done, for example, for player landing on the ground or transitions from stand to crouch. Additionally, ECSP curve has a very nice feature that other camera shakes do not have. It can use randomized curve sets instead of relying strictly only on one. By saying curve set, I mean a combination of location, rotation and FOV curves, which together can be described as a curve set. So the randomization feature simply allows you to store a bunch of predefined curve sets, and the ECSP curve camera shape pattern will randomly pick one when it starts. Curve sets are being picked randomly based on their probability value, and you can also prevent the currently chosen curve set from being played twice in a row by enabling Prevent Repetitions option. The randomization feature is very useful if you want to add more variety to your curve camera shakes. You can easily create few curve sets that are similar to each other, and the ECSP curve camera shake pattern will take care of randomizing them. All you have to do is to simply start it. When it comes to the example pair provided by the ECSP, the randomization feature is used there to create idle camera movements that occur at random time intervals that imitate the player looking into different directions when it's not doing anything in particular. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We discussed all the features of the plugin. Thank you for your time and interest. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. And if you want to learn more about ECSP, check out the official documentation as well as the marketplace page. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.